Yes, I love that question. So it's try to prioritize building relations with the host, with both the guests and the audience as a podcast manager. I think that's really important, like building genuine relationship, having genuine conversations with people and network with them as well, because that's really important. That's what I also tell my guests. So it really works from both angles, from the podcast manager's angles and from the guest angle. Try to get together and just have a conversation. And
Welcome to another episode of That Podcast Exchange. This podcast is an insightful conversation with people at the top of their game and deconstruct them to find the tools and tactics and tricks to help you achieve your dream goal as a podcast producer or podcast manager. My guest today is Noemi Beres of Podcast Connection. She helped entrepreneurs and business owners enrich their lives through connection, sharing their knowledge and connecting them to qualified podcast show. In addition, Noemi is dedicated to helping experts grow their business with interviews. She started to work in the online marketing field back in 2007, and Noemi has a master's degree in Danish literature and language. She is a linguist, content creator, a master organizer. She loves making Han Swin College on Canvas in her free time and playing on her hang and frame drum. She also a walker. So please welcome to the show, Noemi Beres of Podcast Connection. How are you today, Noims?
I'm very well, thank you. And it's very unusual because usually I'm doing interviews with American hosts in the evening, and now it's morning time. And this is the first time I'm having actually a conversation with anyone from Australia as a podcast host. So thank you for having me on your show today, Miko. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to becoming a podcast guest expert?
Well, we don't have like hours for that, so I'm just trying to condense that information. So, first of all, I became an entrepreneur in 2007, and I worked in the online travel industry niche from 2007 until 2020. I was doing content creation, social media marketing, blog writing, travel writing, you name it. And but then COVID hit the whole world, and so we had to pivot and we had to find another business model, which was podcast booking agency model and podcast booking agency niche. And from one day to another, basically, we started our agency in 2020. And this is our fourth year. We are celebrating our fourth anniversary, and right now we're scaling the business. So it's good, and I just love working with people worldwide. We're working with many entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and business owners from the US, Canada, UK. Not so many from Australia, unfortunately, not yet. But yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell. Yes.
Wow, how exciting about that. So, question on that so a lot of listener right now is a podcast manager, podcast producer who is dealing with different clients just like you, but you are more into podcast guesting. What do you think is excite you most about podcast guesting as part of a service of a podcast manager?
I think what most excites me is that sharing valuable insights, sharing the stories, and the authenticity of those stories. I think they are really, really important. And right now, podcasting is a very, very dynamic platform in the world. That doesn't really matter where you are. You can be Europe, US, Australia, but it's a dynamic platform for having very meaningful conversations. And I think that excites people most and me most.
Is there any a common misconception about podcast guests that you like to clear up?
Yes, I think because there's a common misconception that they only need to talk about their own expertise, which is not true. Because the successful guest, they always listen actively to the host and engage actively with the host and the audience. I think that's really important, and that's a common misconception about guests for sure. Yes.
What do you think is the biggest challenges of podcast manager face in podcast guesting, and how can they overcome it?
That's a great question, Miko. I think the biggest challenge is to find the right guest for your show because there are loads of guests out there. And obviously, as a podcast host and podcast manager, you get a lot of emails and pitches like every day. But you really have to pick the right person, right people that align with the message and align with your audience and with the theme of your podcast. So I think that's really important, and it's really hard to find those people because I know, and I heard that from my podcast host friends, that you get so many emails and they don't really care. The many people, they don't care what kind of podcast they want to be on. They're just sending out all these applications. But yeah, you have to pick the best for sure, and that's a challenge sometimes.
So maybe because podcast guesting is one of the tools for growing your podcast as well, I think.
Yes, yes, 100%. Yeah. And I work with many hosts, like many podcast hosts too, because they want to be guests in order to promote their, their podcast on other people's shows and network with other podcast hosts. So yes, that's very true.
So this is one of my. I, I hope it's not a controversial question, but this is what I experienced some as on my team as well, who's doing a podcast booking as well. Sometimes they ask for a fee. Did you encounter that?
Yes. Yeah. I came across a couple of podcasts that they were like sponsored shows. Yeah, it's kind of a controversial topic, I think, in the podcasting world. When someone hires a podcast booking agency, and obviously we always have a fee to find you the right podcast, the clients, the guests, they're not really willing to pay more than they pay us, and it's a bit controversial too because I don't know. I mean, I think podcast guesting should be just free. Like on to be a guest on a show should be free. That's my own opinion, and I know other people will think differently. But I think it stops a lot of quality guests to get on the shows because some people just basically want to charge you to get on those shows. On the other hand, I also understand there are a lot of costs involved when you run a show, and there's a lot of work and energy and time and money involved in that. And sometimes you need to find, editors and hire people to get those interviews out there. So in a way, I understand the host, but my opinion is that maybe it's the best thing to do is to find sponsors for your show. And I know a lot of hosts, and this technique works for them. And I think that would be even better than charge someone to be a guest on your show. I mean, if it's under like $100 US dollar I'm talking about, maybe it might be okay for most of the people. But if it's above $100, I don't think they would go for sponsored podcasts. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think this in this space is like a gray area. Do
Yes,
you want to charge, or you want not to charge, or both of you are like a win-win solution because you promote them, they promote you as well. So it's a gray area, I
it
think.
is.
So if you could give one piece of advice to someone just starting out as a podcast guest booker, a podcast manager, what would it be for you?
Yes, I love that question. So it's try to prioritize building relations with the host, with both the guests and the audience as a podcast manager. I think that's really important, like building genuine relationship, having genuine conversations with people and network with them as well, because that's really important. That's what I also tell my guests. So it really works from both angles, from the podcast manager's angles and from the guest angle. Try to get together and just have a conversation. And I just had a conversation with a gentleman, with a podcast host from Ireland, from Europe, the other day, and he told me that after each interview, he does a post call, and this was like, what's a post in well, like what's a post call after a podcast interview? So they schedule another date when the interview is, or the interview is done, and they just having a friendly conversation between between the two of them, and Sometimes they figure out that they can be business partners. Sometimes they can be, guests in each other masterminds, or they can invite each other to a private Facebook group and have a talk about a certain topic. Or maybe they just become friends and they have nothing to do with business. But I think like a post interview, like post quote unquote interview, would be like a great opportunity just to get to know each other. Because when we record, it's just like, okay, recording is done, goodbye, and we will release your episode, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. But build those genuine relationships, I think that's important, to take a bit of time and take a bit slower and just have those conversations for sure, and have those authentic connections, because that's, for as a podcast manager, it's key to create engaging and successful episodes. So they have to be really genuine and authentic.
So saying about relationship between podcast manager, host, and a guest, what are some of the say? Do you consider like an ethical consideration when you're thinking of getting a guest?
um yeah, I mean that's that's a tricky question, because yeah, sometimes you have to really check out your guests and who will you let you on your show. So, and I know that there are many shows about like politics and whatnot, but like if you are just talking about business, or if you have another type of podcast, so probably not to talk about like religion and business, and like not business but religion or politics. Maybe the key two topics, if you're running like a business podcast, don't mention those two, because sometimes, yeah, people can get offended, or it's a tricky world we're living in. There are a lot of wars going on. People are taking different sides in the world. So I say, yeah, and check out the person when you let someone on your show. Maybe check out their social media profiles like LinkedIn, and do a bit of research, because I think it's important. Those interviews will be there forever. So I think it's important for both parties to have a great relationship during the conversation, and just to find the right people for your show, for sure, that align with you and with your message and ideology in the world.
Do you consider like a pre-interview before the actual interview of your client before you put it on the podcast?
I work with a lot of hosts, and they do pre-calls. Like I would say, like 50% of them right now, they do pre-calls. I think it's important to build a relationship. Maybe if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes before an interview. On the other hand, as a podcast booking agent, for us creates more work. I mean, I have to be honest, because we don't only book one but two interviews, so it's always a lot of more work. But then on the other hand, you get maybe a better understanding of each other, and get a better vibe before the actual conversation, and I think that's important. And it's just good to meet someone before you get on an interview and have an idea about each other. Plus, you can also talk about your topics, about your talking points, and what you want to focus on during the interview. I think that's important as well. You're not just like, okay, I'm here and let's just talk about something. It's like, and no one's prepared. So I think maybe it's a good idea to have a pre-call, for sure.
So my last question for you is that what does the future hold for podcast guests in the next say 5 years?
I think podcast guesting is a booming industry. It's still a booming industry. It started to boom back in 2020, and everybody started a podcast because many people were bored at home during COVID. So it's like, just let's start a podcast. Many podcasts stopped, and yeah, and the best ones are still running and they're still going strong. So I think, and guest will play an even more integral part to create amazing episodes and amazing conversation and telling their authentic stories. So finding those great guests, I think that's great. And also, so you can just focus on these collabs and collaborations, and important conversations with these people and genuine connections, I think it still has a very bright future when it comes to podcast guesting. Many people thought that after COVID, everything will stop because everyone will go back to the live speaking events, live speaking gigs, but it didn't happen. It's still going very strong. So I think it has a pretty bright future when it comes to podcasting, podcast guesting too.
So you're saying it's going to be a good future in the last 5 years, despite after the COVID. What's your opinion on some of the podcaster now are they doing video now as well instead? So yeah, so one of my question is, so my question is, the future of podcast guesting is good in the last
Yes.
5 years now. So it's
Yeah.
getting better. But now there's a lot of technology happening, new technology, AI as well as there. It's gonna be effect on your podcast guesting by using an AI as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it will definitely do that. um, but the good thing about AI, I'm a big fan of AI, and I think it really helps our work because the workload we have as podcast booking agents, it's a lot. And when doing research or even just creating topics or helping create topics for our clients, and with AI you can really save time and you focus on things that are even more important. But definitely, I mean, it has a huge impact even when you do like editing or transcripts or anything. It's everything is done by AI nowadays. So yes, I think we can work together wisely with AI and create even better content, for the future.
Thank you so much for that, Noemi. Can you, if someone want to have a chat with you or have a contact with you through email, and how they can contact you?
Sure. You can always visit our website, which is podcastconnections.co and not com. And you can always find me on LinkedIn. If you type my name in, it's Noemi Beres. So you will find me on LinkedIn and you can get in touch with me and yeah, we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Noemi Beres of Podcast Connection.
Thank you so much, Miko, for having me today. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you so much. This is another episode of That Podcast Exchange, and this is Miko Santos. See you next week.